Before the world knew him as a sage king, Ashoka was born into the shadows of ambition, power, and violence. It was the 3rd century BCE in India. The Mauryan Empire stretched wide, from the Afghan mountains to the Bay of Bengal, and at its heart sat a throne, contested by princes, watched by spies, and surrounded by blood. Ashoka was not the favorite son. He was born to one of Emperor Bindusara's lesser queens. He had no promise of power, no clear right to rule. But what he lacked in title, he made up for in fire. The court saw it early. The boy was sharp, bold, fearless. He hunted alone in forests where others sent soldiers. He studied politics, strategy, and war with a cold focus. And he gained a reputation, not as a golden heir, but as something more dangerous, a prince with nothing to lose. When rebellions flared in the distant province of Ujjain, Ashoka was sent, not honored, but exiled with purpose. Let the wild prince tame the wild lands, they thought. But Ashoka did more than survive. He crushed dissent. He ruled with an iron hand. He brought order and fear. Word reached Pataliputra, the imperial capital. Whispers turned to admiration. The forgotten son had become a storm. Then came the death of the emperor. A vacuum. A war of succession. Ashoka returned with an army. What happened next would be remembered in fear. His brothers slain, rivals executed, courtiers silenced. Ashoka seized the throne not with birthright, but with blood. They called him Chandashoka, Ashoka the Fierce. He was now emperor of the Mauryan Empire. But this story, this kind knight's tale, is not about how he gained power. It is about how he chose to use it. Now take a deep breath. Let the weight of the day fall off your shoulders. Close your eyes, or let them rest gently. You're safe here. Tonight, we'll travel back in time, not to witness war or fear, but to remember an act of kindness the world must never forget. Welcome to Kind Nights. Let's begin. The empire was vast, but Ashoka wanted more. On the eastern edge of his dominion lay Kalinga, a proud, independent kingdom on the coast of the Bay of Bengal. It had resisted Mauryan control for decades. Its people were warriors, traders, artists, free. And Ashoka wanted it crushed. In the 8th year of his reign, he marched east. An army of hundreds of thousands, soldiers, elephants, war chariots, thundered toward Kalinga. The people of Kalinga resisted, with passion, with fury, with everything they had. The battle that followed became one of the bloodiest in ancient Indian history. Corpses lined the rivers. Cities were burned. Forests echoed with the cries of widows and orphans. It is said that over 100,000 people were killed. More than 150,000 were taken captive. Families torn apart. Villages erased. When Ashoka walked through the battlefield, something shifted. He saw the burned homes, the broken bodies, the faces of mourning, not warriors, but mothers, children, elders. This wasn't glory. It wasn't honor. It was grief. For the first time, the emperor who had risen through violence fell silent. He could conquer a kingdom, but not his conscience. In that silence, a new voice began to speak within him. One that asked, what is power without mercy? What is victory without compassion? And in that moment, on the ashes of Kalinga, Ashoka the Fierce began to die, and Ashoka the Kind began to rise. Ashoka returned to Pataliputra not in triumph, but in torment. The cheers of the court meant little. The war banners now seemed drenched in blood. His sleep was broken. His food lost its taste. The cries of Kalinga haunted his mind. He began to withdraw from the pomp of the palace. He wandered the gardens, sat by the Ganges for hours, refused to celebrate the so-called victory. One day, as the story goes, a monk was brought to court, a humble figure in simple robes, a teacher of Dhamma, the way of wisdom and peace. The monk did not fear the emperor. He simply bowed and said, "True conquest is of the self. Compassion is the highest law." Those words took root. Ashoka began to study. He surrounded himself with scholars, sages, and spiritual teachers. He read deeply from Buddhist teachings. He listened to Jain ascetics. He sought out Brahmin philosophers. He opened his mind to all paths that taught kindness. But remorse alone was not enough. Ashoka wanted action, change, redemption. He began to reject cruelty in all forms, not only in war but in governance and law, in daily life. Executions slowed. Torture chambers were dismantled. Prisons were reformed. He wasn't seeking approval. He was seeking peace, not just for his people, but for himself. And so, the emperor who had once ruled by fear began walking the long road of remorse, step by step, toward mercy. Words matter, but carved words endure. Ashoka wanted the entire empire, from dusty villages to mountain passes, to hear his new vision. But he didn't rely on messengers alone. He turned to stone. Across the empire, he ordered giant pillars and rock faces to be inscribed with his new beliefs. These were not laws of punishment. They were declarations of compassion, tolerance, and moral duty. Written in local languages, using scripts the people could read, they stood tall where markets gathered and roads converged. These became known as the edicts of Ashoka. He told his people, "All men are my children. I desire their welfare and happiness in this world and the next." He urged against killing. He promoted honesty. He encouraged respect for all religions. He demanded fair treatment of prisoners, care for the elderly, and the protection of animals. Ashoka's words didn't just echo through royal halls. They were etched into the everyday lives of millions. On roadsides, in forests, at the gates of cities. He didn't order temples to himself. He built messages for others, reminders of kindness, duty, and empathy. His empire became not only a political power, but a moral one. And with every pillar raised, every stone carved, the emperor rewrote his legacy, not with swords, but with syllables. The warrior king had become a stonecutter of peace. Ashoka's vision of kindness was not confined to words. It poured into streets, flowed into villages, and took root in the very soil of his empire. He ordered the construction of hospitals for people and animals alike, an act unheard of in most of the ancient world. These were not just places for elites. They were for commoners, travelers, even wounded animals. Herbal gardens were planted beside them, staffed by trained healers and supported by state funding. But healing went beyond medicine. He had wells dug in dry lands and shade trees planted along highways, where travelers might find rest in the heat of day. Every few miles, he had rest houses constructed, simple shelters with food, water, and a quiet place to sleep. These were not symbols of grandeur. They were tools of compassion. Inscriptions from his reign speak of these acts with plain clarity. Let there be comfort. Let there be safety. Let the people thrive. Ashoka also sent teams to inspect villages, not to collect taxes or enforce power, but to ensure that people were being treated fairly, that no one went unheard. He declared animal slaughter limited. He banned the killing of certain species entirely. He promoted kindness not only to humans but to all living beings. This was no longer a king ruling from a throne. This was a man walking his empire, step by step, laying the foundation of a gentler world. Ashoka's mission of kindness could not be confined within the borders of his empire. Compassion, he believed, should not be limited by geography, language, or creed. So he sent messengers. From the mountain passes of the northwest to the shores of Sri Lanka, Ashoka dispatched emissaries, not warriors, but monks, healers, and peace-seekers. Their task was not to conquer, but to share. They carried no swords. They carried the Dhamma, the path of righteousness, nonviolence, and universal respect. Some traveled to Egypt, Syria, and Greece. Others journeyed across seas to Southeast Asia. The messages they brought were simple but revolutionary. Live in harmony. Respect life. Embrace truth. Help the weak. Ashoka also welcomed envoys from abroad. His court became a center of cultural exchange, where ideas from Persia, China, and Hellenistic lands mingled with Indian philosophy. He supported translations of teachings into different languages. He built rest houses not only for locals but also for foreign visitors. He made kindness a diplomatic strategy. It was a soft power that changed hearts, not borders. And through these messengers of mercy, the spirit of Ashoka moved beyond stone, beyond India, into the conscience of civilizations. Even centuries later, echoes of his compassion would ripple through Buddhist teachings in Tibet, in Thailand, in Korea, in Japan. Ashoka had begun as a conqueror of land. Now he was a conqueror of hearts. As Ashoka aged, the palace grew quieter. His sons and daughters were sent across the empire, some to govern, some to preach the Dhamma. But Ashoka himself remained in Pataliputra, surrounded by silence, stone, and memory. He no longer wore the grandeur of a conqueror. He dressed in simple robes. He ate with monks. He walked without guards among his people. The mighty emperor, who had once painted his rule in blood, now carried a walking stick, carved not with lions or swords, but with lotus flowers. In his final years, Ashoka visited the sacred sites of the Buddha's life, Lumbini, Bodh Gaya, Sarnath. He left behind inscriptions marking each one, not as trophies, but as reminders of humility, peace, and awakening. He issued final edicts, gentle, reflective messages urging future rulers to value compassion over conquest and to remember that power is fleeting, but kindness leaves a trace. When illness came, it came softly. Ashoka did not demand grand rituals or golden tombs. He asked that his wealth be given to the poor and that his name be remembered not for how he ruled, but for how he changed. No one knows the exact date of his death. No one can point to a tomb with certainty. But in the shaded roads he built, the hospitals he funded, and the inscriptions that still stand after 2,000 years, Ashoka lives on. And in every whisper of kindness spoken across time, the emperor who chose mercy still walks among us. Ashoka's story is not just a relic of the past. It is a living mirror, reflecting what leadership can become when it listens to pain instead of silencing it. He began as a man shaped by war, rage, and ambition. But he chose a different path. One paved not with conquest, but with compassion. Not with walls, but with wells. Not with fear, but with healing. His transformation reminds us that even the most powerful can change, and that kindness, when rooted in action, can ripple for millennia. In a world still struggling between cruelty and compassion, Ashoka's legacy whispers a timeless truth. Mercy is mightier than the sword. As you rest tonight, let his story cradle your thoughts, a tale of a king who laid down arms, lifted hearts, and proved that true greatness lies not in how many bow to you, but in how many rise because of you. Sleep gently, with the kindness of Ashoka in your dreams.